everyone, I'm Miss Pointer. I'm going to give you a short video on evolution, and we're going to look at the process of natural selection and look at how it managed to change the horse from a very small creature, only 40 centimetres tall, up to the beasts that we see here now. This topic is covered in the IGCSE, and we will be focusing on the specific terminology and understandings you will need to cover for your exams. Before you watch this video, you should already have a basic understanding of genetic inheritance. The evolution of the horse has taken place over the last 50 million years. The modern horse we see today did not always look like this. We will be having a look at what it looked like 50 million years ago and how it ended up looking like it does today. The common ancestor of the modern horse was a small, tropical, forest-dwelling dog or tapir-like organism. There are a number of features which are notably different. Of course, there is its height. There's also the fact that it had many toes which spread out to help it travel through the dense forest, and it had much shorter, smaller, sharper teeth to pick off leaves from bushes. Over time, the climate changed, and so did the environment in response to this. The forest opened up and gave way to grassland, which was a much harsher environment with vast open spaces. The species we see today is the result of environmental pressures driving the selection for organisms with advantageous traits to survive and have more offspring. They then can pass on those traits to their offspring, leading to the eventual spread of that trait throughout the entire population. As the early horses moved from the forest to grassland, they needed to become faster in order to outrun their predators. Previously, they would have been able to hide in the forest undergrowth because of their small size, but the openness of the plains and the grassland meant that there was nowhere to hide, so the only option was to be able to outrun your predator. Their legs became longer and their bodies more streamlined. They changed from having wide, flat feet with many toes to narrow single hooves, as running on their toes made them faster. Now, it's important to recognise that these early horses didn't have any special powers to be able to conveniently change their physical features. This is a point that students often get muddled, so it's really important that you understand this. The process of evolution is a passive process. Nature selects the individuals who just happen to have the slightly better features by allowing them to survive and outcompete their relatives who are less good. When we look at this particular example on the page now, we know that the ones with the short legs were slower than the horses who had a genetic mutation to make them slightly longer. The horses with the longer legs could outrun the short legs. They didn't necessarily have to outrun the predator, they just needed to outrun their short stumpy friends. They'll live to fight another day, they'll have some babies and pass on their long limbs to their offspring. Sadly, the stumpy ones don't get to survive, so they can't have any babies and they can't pass on their genes. Their stumpy leg genes then won't be passed on into the next generation. Over time, each generation will have fewer ancestral short legs within the population and will have more of the newer characteristics of the long legs. This process will keep happening all the time while there is an advantage to be fast. It is important to remember, though, that if there were no predators, then there would be no need to run fast, and therefore no selection pressure would be driving that process of natural selection. So hopefully you can understand that it isn't a huge mutation that causes a drastic change in the characteristics. In reality, mutations are very subtle and make small incremental changes over a very long time, over many generations, which allows the organisms to change. Eventually, they are so different from their ancestors that they are then considered a new species. We've looked now at one example of an advantageous trait, which would have been a selective advantage for the early horses, but there are also some other advantageous traits which would have been selected as well, which PJ and Hector are going to help show you now. Okay, so we just looked at how the limb gets longer as they evolve so that they can run faster. One of the other things that we saw in the diagram was, as well as the limb getting longer, they also go from having lots of toes that spread out just down to one single toe. What's really interesting, if you come a bit closer, you can see this sort of thorny bit of growth here, which is called a chestnut, and that's actually an evolutionary relic of when they used to have a toe. Fun fact. Another adaptation they might need is teeth that are adapted for eating grasses. So rather than having teeth that were able to pick small leaves, they've gone to having much larger and flatter teeth which are designed for grazing grasses. And their teeth actually go all the way back to just below their ear. It's got tough lips that are able to pick and sort of separate the grass out. Another adaptation is their tail, which is brilliant for swishing away flies. In the forest you can sort of take shelter under trees and sort of hang out in a bush to get away from the flies. In the open grassland you can't get away from them. One of the unique adaptations that horses have is you see this little triangle here, and that's soft and sensitive, and it's like their finger, and that is able to push against the ground and compress the blood vessels as he walks or runs. And every time he steps and presses on that sensitive structure, it helps with the venous return, so getting the blood back up the body so that it doesn't pool down in his lower limbs. So obviously I could spend a lot of time talking about horse anatomy, but I won't bore you with it. What we'll do now is just finish off with a summary of the key points that you need to remember for the processes that take place for evolution to occur. So to summarise, the first thing that we need to think about is the fact that there is variation within the population. So some will have short legs, some will have long legs, etc. With that variation there will then be a survival of the fittest. Some will be better adapted, some will be worse off adapted. Once you've got survival of the fittest ones are able to survive to reproduce, the weaker ones die and they can't pass on their genes to future generations. Over time, the selection pressures will cause very small but significant changes over time, which mean that the creature becomes better suited for its new environment. The keywords for this topic that you need to know about are here. We're gonna be covering today. Got it? Teeth. Hector. So Hector, we need to do the last bit with the recap of the key words.